Então a gente vai estar quase correndo. Então, bom, gente, vou passar para vocês, então, de uma forma mais condensada agora, tá? Sequencial, só as estruturas que a gente tem hoje para fazer avaliações de tecnologias em saúde. Tá? Por que a gente precisa ter algum método, algum sistema de avaliação de... Na verdade, principalmente nessas últimas décadas, estão surgindo muito rápido muitas novas tecnologias, são medicamentos novos, formas novas, próteses, equipamentos, tudo que está envolvido que eu vou usar em prol do paciente ou na estrutura hospitalar ou no atendimento de saúde. Tá? Nem tudo que é novo, moderno, necessariamente é bom ou melhor do que aquilo que já existe há 50 anos. Algumas coisas, elas são lançadas no mercado industrial, tentando ser vendido como uma coisa fantástica, mas no fundo só resolve a mesma coisa que aquilo por cincão, né, dos últimos 50 anos estava resolvendo. Como saber se é melhor ou não é melhor? Precisa fazer uma avaliação objetiva. E esta avaliação precisa ser reproduzível. Você faz e você chega no mesmo consenso como eu fazendo. Então, hoje, na verdade, a gente tem essa necessidade de se fazer processos de avaliação desses novos conceitos, né, dessas novas tecnologias que vêm da saúde. Então, como eu já falei, tá? Na verdade, hoje, como tecnologia de saúde, a gente vai entender, tá, este conjunto, né, tá, de medicamento, material, equipamento, procedimentos, sistemas, organizações, informação, tudo aquilo, protocolos de atendimento. Tá? Tem um paciente com otite média aguda. Antes, tratava 24 horas, esperava, olhava. Nova proposta. Chega, faz uma tomografia para avaliar a extensão desta infecção e aí começa a tratar. É melhor? Vale a pena o custo a mais de fazer uma tomografia para todos os pacientes? Vale a pena cada paciente receber uma irradiação, uma tomografia, para iniciar o tratamento de uma otite média aguda? Quem já teve pensar até 4 anos de idade, 80% das crianças tiveram pelo menos uma infecção de ouvido na vida deles. É absurdamente comum. Certo? Se eu vou fazer uma tomografia para qualquer otite média aguda que eu vou receber, eu posso notar aqui 3 tomógrafos dia e noite e vou fazendo tomografias para otite média aguda. E deixa o sistema de saúde caríssimo falido depois de um mês. Olha que eu deixei um monte de crianças brilhando de tanta radiação que receberam, né? A infecção, tá? Vai ganhando 2, 3 infecções. Tá? Então, hoje, tá? Este método é chamado de avaliação de tecnologias em saúde. E é, então, essa avaliação de um processo mais organizado e que possa ser reproduzido por várias pessoas em vários lugares do mundo. Eu chego a esse consenso, né, a nível de eficácia, a nível, né, de utilidade para isso, o povo lá do Canadá tem que chegar no mesmo consenso. A segurança desse procedimento. A única coisa que vai mudar para nós, Canadá e eu, custo e dentro do meu orçamento. Eu entendo que o meu orçamento não é necessariamente o mesmo orçamento. Então, eu preciso avaliar se isso para mim é factível ou não. Certo? Qualquer coisa tem. É a nossa vida igual. um remédio ou uma nova prótese, ela é planejada, ela é testada inicialmente in vitro, em ratinhos e alguma coisa. Estava sendo lançado para o mercado, né, se mostrou seguro para ser usado por humanos, né, começa a ter o registro no Anvisa, né, no órgão, o FDA nosso, que regula, né, o registro do medicamento. E começa a ser difundido, né, ela atinge seu pico, sua difusão máxima, né, para o mercado, que todo mundo usa para a primeira escolha, ou, né, para todo mundo, claro, esse quando é assim, assado. Tá? E em algum momento da vida vai começar a ser abandonado porque ela se não é eficaz mais, um antibiótico pode ter resistência, tá? Ou um material de uma prótese, depois de 10, 15, 20 anos a gente tem outro material que é mais barato, melhor, menos contaminação, maior durabilidade. Então, isso vai ser substituído gradativamente por uma nova tecnologia que vai entrar no lugar dela. Certo? Tá? Essa é a vida, né, de qualquer coisa que a gente tem. Televisão, computador, seu celular, tá? Qualquer coisa é assim. E na medicina também. Tá? A avaliação das técnicas, a estratégia que a gente usa para fazer uma avaliação mais objetiva é a avaliação baseada em evidências. Vocês já devem ter estudado isso no eixo da pesquisa, níveis de evidência, o quão fidedigno, ou quão reproduzível que foi gerado esse dado. Para olhar na literatura, na verdade, nesse princípio baseado em evidências, você rastreia toda a literatura que você tem hoje, né, pelas suas máquinas de... Você separa os artigos, os trabalhos, estudos, que você considera que tem a melhor qualidade, se aplicam melhor para você, para daí analisar esses trabalhos quanto a número de população que foi envolvido, se tem algum viés, se tem algum problema, algum erro, né, na seleção. Então, assim, não foi colocar, só foi colocar uma faixa etária X, mas eu quero usar o equipamento velhinhos de 80 anos. Será que funciona? É reproduzir. Consigo garantir que, né, para a criança eu tenho o mesmo efeito do que para aquela população em que o estudo me mostrou superioridade? Eles pegaram um estudo de... Hoje eu tenho à disposição um estudo que comparou 20 jovens adolescentes contra 20 doentes. Uma população de 20 é representativo para a população geral da doença? É uma doença rara, talvez, mas se não é uma... Se é uma doença mais comum, hipertensão, eu quero te dar meu comprimido, vamos dizer, né? Testei em 20 e funcionou. Vai sair das curvas Artana e vai arrastar o BXYZ? Mas não, né? Porque você não sabe o que isso pode arrecadar de efeitos laterais. Se eu testei em 20 por 2 meses e não deu problema, quer dizer que seja bom. Certo? Então, isso eu vou analisar no estudo. Vou analisar quanto tempo de follow-up. Se a complicação de uma doença, né, eu espero daqui a 1 ano, 2 anos, não adianta você me falar que ele se mostrou superior nos primeiros 2 meses. Eu não vou ter o efeito. Não. Né? Tá? Então, todos esses riscos você vai pesando. Daí você vai de uma recomendação forte para uma recomendação moderada, para uma recomendação fraca, para uma não recomendação. Certo? Claro, para os dois lados. A favor da nova tecnologia ou contra a nova tecnologia. E, às vezes alguns estudos mostram que tem muitos efeitos colaterais e que você, de antemão, já se manifesta fortemente contra esta nova tecnologia. Certo? Tá? esse novo... Tá? A pirâmide dos níveis de evidência hoje, os estudos que já juntam vários estudos clínicos com delineamento mais preciso, são as revisões sistemáticas. Nas revisões sistemáticas, você já fez uma junção da literatura que você né, tá? Para selecionar os melhores estudos de qualidade, em geral são estudos e a população. Tá? Ninguém sabe quem recebeu o remédio, quem recebeu o placebo, faz uma avaliação, 2 avaliações, avaliando, não sabe quem é paciente, né? Tá? Quem vai analisar os resultados não sabe quem gerou o resultado. Então, você tem um segmento em vários níveis para você tentar evitar que um puxe a sardinha para o seu grupo preferido. Né? As revisões sistemáticas pegam preferencialmente os dados desses estudos. São mais que são, já tentam no seu planejamento evitar quaisquer possíveis. Tá? Eles agrupam esses dados, então se eu tenho 3 desses estudos, um fez com 80 pacientes, outro fez com 30 pacientes e o outro fez com mais 80 pacientes, eu consigo ter uma análise dos 190 pacientes. Como se fosse um estudo multicêntrico, mas sendo feito, na verdade, de uma forma independente. Tá? Então, isso aumenta o poder de interpretação que eu vou dizer depois. Óbvio, eu vou ter 190 em vez dos 30 e dizer, é bom. Né? Tá? Ou tem esse defeito. Né? Tá? Esses ensaios clínicos randomizados, estudos clínicos randomizados, são os segundo melhores que a gente tem hoje como estudos nos quais você vai se basear. Então, nesses estudos clínicos randomizados, você tem planejados estudos prospectivos, onde você vai deixar bem claro de antemão quais características que o seu grupo de e que o seu grupo de controle também tem que ter, porque você só quer que eles diferenciem em um fator. Eu quero fazer uma avaliação de o quanto que a atividade física vai mudar o desfecho da apneia do sono ou da sonolência diurna, certo? Eu pego pacientes que têm apneia do sono, que em geral são obesos, podem ter hipertensão, podem ter diabetes juntos, e aí eu pego um grupo controle, tipo vocês. É uma boa comparação? Não, né? Faixa etária não bate, vocês têm outros hábitos de vida, ninguém tem sobrepeso, obesidade para entrar nesta faixa, que pode por si só ter sonolência, ou então, tá pior, como eu peguei vocês, não, agora vocês ainda mais ou menos. Eu pego vocês no internato, que vocês começam a dar plantão e não sei das quantas, tá? Vocês entram num outro problema da avaliação do desfecho, sonolência diurna, que é a privação de sono. Então, vocês têm que ter hábitos mais ou menos iguais. Não adianta pegar um cara de turno, né, e comparar com um aposentado que não faz nada o dia todo e que tem, né, a sua vida altamente regrada quanto aos horários de acordar, dormir, comer e fazer qualquer coisa. Né? Tá? Certo? Então, esses ensaios clínicos randomizados, eles procuram deixar, né, todas essas variáveis o mais próximo possível entre os grupos, para deixar só aquele fator de risco bem aberto, onde você vai intervir com um remédio. Tá? Quero testar hipertensão, remédio A versus remédio B. A é o remédio tradicional que a gente tem, B é o que eu quero lançar no mercado. Então, eu preciso pegar o mesmo perfil de paciente, do mesmo perfil de hipertensão. Certo? deve chegar. Vão chegar. Vão chegar. Almoçar, aí eu passo o restinho, mais 10 minutinhos, e aí a gente discute o resto com a Érica. Eles chegaram? Olha lá. Vai continuando? Eva?
Yes, hello.
Hi, Eva.
Sorry, I can only see the slides. And I can't see you. Sorry, I am here.
Yes, now you can see me. Hi, Eva.
For some reason, my microphone is not working.
No. Good. No, Eva, I will. We just started to discuss something about technologies.
Oh, hello.
Don't worry. Don't worry. Now you are. It's yours.
Okay.
All yours.
However, at this point, I think I have a problem with the sound. So if you want...
What is the problem? You don't hear us?
No, I can hear you, but if I walk here, I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do. Yes,
oh, yeah, cool.
We do. Perfectly.
Cool. This is all a little bit of a strange arrangement. So I just wanted to ask first, so what happened with the timing?
You had summertime ending.
Okay.
And we not.
And you guys have time at the moment for this?
Yes.
Do we have the whole hour?
The whole hour. Yeah. 45 minutes? Do you think it's possible? Not so much?
Let's see. And do you have my slides on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I will ask people to switch the slides. Is that okay?
Yes. Just like Andrew. Yes, that's okay. O screen é de vocês. Não tem? Compartilhar aqui no computador. Yes.
Okay, so it is lovely to speak to you. I'm so sorry for technical difficulties. Before I start, I would like to ask you one question and one kind of suggestion from me. One is, if you would like to ask a question, if something was unclear, please raise your hand. I will aim to look at you and to scan the room for the questions. I always encourage my students to interrupt me while I'm speaking rather than keeping it for the end, because we may run out of time, you may forget your question. So if there's something that you did not understand or something you'd like to need to clarify or repeat, please raise your hand. Is that okay? A little bit of a nod. Okay, it is very difficult to be doing this on Skype. So so if I ask if everything is all right, is there any chance you could give me some sort of sign that it is fine?
Yes. It's okay.
Okay, and from students, so if I say, do you understand? And if the connection is good, is everything clear? Can I see some sort of sign from you guys? Okay. Second.
Yes.
Okay. Second question is, do you get a little bit of sociology and anthropology as part of your medical curriculum?
Not really.
Not really.
Not really.
Okay. So what I am going to do today is going through some basics, but in order for me to cover the topic of cultural competence and the ways in which culture and health are very, very clearly interrelated, I will cover some of the core concepts of sociology and anthropology that we usually teach our first-year students. Because it is very difficult for me to know how much knowledge you already have, so if you me going into the area that you're like, oh yeah, we've done it last year, this is here. You can also, raise a hand and be like, oh, can we move on? Is that okay?
Yes.
A little bit of a nod, okay, thank you. So I'll change the slide now, just a little bit lecture outline so that you can follow. Now, a suggestion is for you to actually listen to what I'm saying rather than rely on reading the slides. Slides are there to support you, but there will be a lot of narrative elements that I am telling that are not on the slides, okay? And for you to get the grasp of the whole thing, is that okay?
Yes.
So if we have lecture outline on the screen, so today I will talk generally about this relationship between culture and health, and why talking about culture in healthcare is important, especially in a globalizing world and in a world that is so connected in contemporary world. I'm going to introduce you to this idea of cultural competence. That is an idea that is very, very specific to a European healthcare system. And I will ask you, so I would like you a little bit of an indication. I will ask you questions about it, because this an American model framework, but there might be that in Brazil you have some elements of healthcare that are more familiar or more like the American ones than they are like British ones. So I will be asking you. And then I will very, very quickly move on to this idea of why this particular framework is problematic, and try to offer you some alternatives to it. So now a little bit of a background. So I am an anthropologist, and in the UK, teaching sociology, anthropology, and psychology is an integral part of the medical curriculum. Okay, so all of our first and second years, students, before they go into the clinics, they do get a lot of teaching that is mainly to do with this idea that health and illness and the body itself are actually not biological phenomenon that is so universal across the world that it is the only way that there is a straightforward way of describing it, understanding it, and so on, but rather that there are social and cultural processes involved in contributing to who falls ill and how, that the body itself is not simply a biological phenomenon, but has very, very strong underlying social, cultural, and political aspects to it, the way we conceptualize the boundary, body and non-body, the way health inequalities articulate through the bodily symptoms, and so on. Okay? So this one single lecture is kind of then a window into a sociological and anthropological approach to global health. Okay? Does it make sense so far? Okay, good. Let's move on to the next slide. And now my first question to you. So, are you familiar with a distinction between disease and illness?
I don't.
Anybody has heard that disease and illness are not two words that you can use interchangeably?
This is bad, because in Portuguese it is the same word.
Okay. So, and is there any element of your curriculum that you do in English?
No, but I think these are the two concepts of the same word for us. And when we hear about disease or illness, we have to know that I have a disease, but I have to consider the illness also. So go ahead with the two definitions, because for them it is okay. It is necessary to understand that I just don't have only a vector for disease.
So, if you're lacking the linguistic separation between two words in Portuguese, then it might be a little bit of a challenge to understand what is the big deal with this distinction. But the point is that the word disease is describing a simple pathological deviation from a norm. It can be at the cellular level, at the molecular level. It can be a structural deviation. It can be absolutely anything that, if science has an idea of what a normal bodily functioning is supposed to be, and any form of deviation that would be called disease, right? Now, illness, on the other hand, has nothing to do with the pathology itself at the bodily level. Illness is an experience of disease. So it's a subjective, personal experience of pain, discomfort, inability to do something because of your symptoms, and so on, right? And we make the separation between the two precisely because they do not overlap. They overlap, but they are not the same thing, right? Think of those diseases that may not articulate as illness, at least at some stages. So think about early stages of cancer, HIV infection, hypertension. These are pathological deviations from some sort of norm that, if you as clinicians measured, found an underlying disease, but your patients would not be coming to you with complaints of symptoms, right? Because they are not feeling ill, they are feeling healthy, but there is some sort of pathological process happening in the body. But also these concepts are not the same because there are situations when your patients report symptoms, they report feeling unwell, but you as clinicians cannot find any underlying pathology, right? So there is an illness, your patient is saying that I am unwell, but you cannot find any deviation from the norm. So everything in the body is fine, but people are still coming with symptoms that may point to lots of different things, right? So think about chronic pain that persists after the fracture has healed. Think about chronic fatigue syndrome that is still in many parts of the world has not gained a label of appropriate diagnosis, right? So for years, mostly women have been reporting feeling unwell and tired and not being able to do anything and going to their family doctors. Everybody were telling that you're fine. All of the tests are showing that you are okay, right? So the distinction between these two categories, kind of a way through which social sciences are coming into investigating health and illness and healthcare and bodies and the relationship between patients and doctors in more kind of in-depth way, right? So the idea at first, before we have this definition, the idea is that, well, if a human body is the subjective reality, just have a body, something breaks, it hurts, you go to a doctor, right? The disease clearly defined, your lung collapsed and breathe. So that as if there is this universal experience that somehow directly is being translated from the body to the patient, from the patient to the healthcare provider, right? So now suddenly what social scientists like me, let's change the slide now, are actually saying that by making this distinction between disease and illness, we are acknowledging that whereas disease can be seen as natural and a historical process, right? The illness as experience cannot be universal by no account, because people live their lives in social context and culturally determined ways, right? Make sense so far? Let's change the slide. So the distinction between the two is allowing us to say that the way people experience the way people experience illness, the way people experience symptoms, happen within the cultural context in which people live their lives, right? So I cannot perceive pain outside of language. So in order for me to share my pain, or how much does it hurt, in order for me to articulate that, because there is no test for pain, I have to be able to find metaphors that are culturally specific to express that pain to you as a clinician, right? So for instance, if I say it hurts like hell, right? I'm trying to say that it hurts a lot, but I'm using a metaphor that is cultural, right? So you have to understand the idea of hell that comes from Christianity for you to be able to perceive that expression, that articulation of pain. So what I'm saying here is that so the point is that culture and society and our family lives are the context within which we experience even the basic of symptoms, right? But also these cultural aspects determine how we provide explanations for sickness, whether we imagine whether something can be cured, managed or not. Culture also has a lot to do with ideas that are surrounding particular conditions. So, for instance, I can say that up until now in the UK, we still have this idea that lung cancer is something that people brought on themselves, whereas breast cancer is something that mobilizes people forward because there is no victim, right? But these ideas attributing particular moral values to these conditions are not part of these conditions, right? They are part of the cultural framework within which we live our lives, and these frameworks help us understand and make sense of being ill, right? Make sense so far? A little bit of a nod from students. Okay.
Okay. Everybody's understanding everything.
Very good. So let's move on to the next slide.
We turned off the air conditioner. It was getting freezing.
Oh, okay. So the idea is that, and this is where I'm introducing the core idea in anthropology and sociology, without which we cannot talk about cultural competence, right? So I am making this big loop for us to get where we need to get. And this idea is that social phenomena are socially constructed rather than an objective reality that is out there, right? So you coming from biomedical backgrounds, and many of my colleagues who are bioscientists, no matter from what discipline, they are trained within this philosophical position called positivism. And positivism is an approach which simply says, so there is this one single reality out there, and we can know that reality by certain procedures, right? So if I can observe the tree falling, means the tree fell. And if everybody's seen that, then it is, so it has fell. Because it is so, the reality is so objective that everybody would be able to see, right? So the paradigm within which sociology and anthropology operates is called social constructivism. And it is simply saying that there is no objective social reality that we're operating in, that there is an experience that we all make sense of separately, right? That every phenomenon has a historical and political origins in it, and we have to acknowledge how certain ideas about certain things constantly change. So that the fact that we cannot agree what is a nation state, or what is a society in general, or what is a culture, so that these phenomena are actually socially constructed. So the idea is that illness as well is a social construct. It is not a natural phenomenon that happens within bodies, but it is socially constructed. We agree that certain illnesses mean something, that certain symptoms lead to certain illnesses, and so on. And if you're coming from different cultural backgrounds, our understanding of illness might in itself be very, very different, right? The way we conceptualize, I will try to give you a couple of examples later on. Trying to think of, so even think about epilepsy, right? In northern India, where I do my field work, epilepsy is not seen as a condition of the body, seen as a condition of the soul. Because epilepsy is not a bodily, not a disease. It's an example of you being possessed by an evil spirit. So that construct of claiming the causality of disease, or whether it is a disease in the first place, depends on the context from which you come from, right? So it is socially and culturally constructed. So there is no universal, all across the world, same experience of epilepsy. It's actually very much culturally distinct. So let's move on with the slides. The idea is that what counts as health and illness in different societies is very, very different in different historical periods. So think about the chronic fatigue syndrome that I mentioned to you before. That it's just very recently in the United Kingdom that it started being recognized as a condition. Think about endometriosis, which it was only in the last 10 years that in the UK, doctors started acknowledging that heavy period is potentially pointing to endometriosis. And in the 1970s, literature is showing that women who went to their GPs to complain with heavy periods were accused of radical rejection of femininity. Because heavy period was not a pathology that was recognized by doctors, wasn't a disease, so the category of it is changing throughout the decades. At first, it is nothing, it's a radical rejection of femininity, and now we have a category of is an illness that might also lead to disability and structural things in place to cure it, right? So the category of illness itself is very much shifting historically. And I have this photo on the slide, if you can see. It's an ad for nicotine cigarettes from the 1950s. That was the time when smoking was not seen as, well, the epidemiological evidence linking smoking to cancer was not there in place because it was only done in the 80s. So in the 50s, smoking was still a cool thing to do, and it was very much related to the Marlboro Man and ideas about masculinity. And there were certain brands that tried to come up with a smooth taste for women, but not simply for women, for pregnant women. And there is, I think this is a brilliant illustration how our ideas of what constitutes healthy behaviors, what constitutes illness, what constitutes risk, are actually very much dependent on the context, both historical and cultural, in determining how we think about these conditions. Next slide, and now very quickly about this. I love this bit. Symptoms are also very different across cultures. I understand that for medical students it's very difficult to believe, but I will give you this one example about menopause from a cross-cultural perspective. And then later on you can share with me how menopause is seen in Brazil. So in the US and in the UK, Brazil is a pathological event, right? The cessation of menstruation that also articulates with symptoms such as hot flushes, night sweats, and risks of osteoporosis, right? And it's something that is dreaded, and there are hormone replacement therapies. coming into place to help to increase the quality of life. Now, there were two anthropologists who went. One of them was Marcia Flint, who went to India in the 70s to explore women's experiences of menopause there. What she found was that Indian women did not report any symptoms of menopause other than cessation of menstruation. They did not complain of night flushes or night sweats. They did not complain of anything, because for them, stopping menstruation was a positive experience. It was a transition in the life cycle from a woman who was more or less confined in the home to a woman who suddenly, because she met this rite of passage of stopping menstruation, she was allowed to go to places where she wasn't allowed to go before. She was allowed to sit down with men in much more open ways. She had much more control over her own life. She had much more freedom. She was also seen as wise, and everybody were coming to her to ask for advice. So what Marcia Flint is saying, that in a youth-obsessed culture, such as US and UK, where menopause is seen as one step towards death, basically, it is seen as a negative event that needs medical treatment. Whereas in India, where elder women are seen as possessing wisdom and freedom, menopause is actually seen as a positive event and does not carry any symptoms with them, because women do not complain of it. It wasn't an illness. A similar finding was found by Margaret Locke, who did a similar thing in Japan. And she said Japanese women report very different symptoms for menopause. They do not report night sweats or hot flashes. There are not even such a word in Japanese for hot flashes. They report more headaches and shoulder pain, but much less than the amount of reporting symptoms in the US. She also looked at the database for lifetime risk of osteoporosis related to menopause, and the risk was much, much lower for Japanese women. What she's trying to say is that there is no universality to our human bodies, and that the cultural understandings and are actually contributing more to the experience of illness itself than some form of universal criteria. Make sense so far? Very good. Let's move on with the slides. So, the point was that in the 1990s in the US, when clinicians and social scientists realized that their population is increasingly diverse, both culturally, but not only, that people were coming to consultations with their own ideas of illness causation, their own interpretations of symptoms, their own ideas of what is stigmatized and what is not. Depression and the diagnosis of depression is stigmatized in many different contexts. The perception of pain and this whole cultural idea of can you show pain, can you not? So all of these were obstacles to physicians to treat the increasingly diverse body of population. And they said that the healthcare that suits everybody is non-existent, and we need to tailor it to our culturally diverse area. But the cultural competency approach is not simply related to the cultural ideas, but also about other axes of other characteristics of your population that brings in different understandings, right, of disease and illness and treatment and so on. So race, ethnicity, and gender and sexual orientation are all kind of criteria according to which that stratify the way people experience illness, generally speaking. So what cultural competence approach aimed to do is to equip clinicians with their competence in culture, right? They said we can teach our clinicians to understand that a spirit possession is a diagnosis amongst Cambodian families. That might be a diagnosis, and you as a clinician in the United States have to be able to work with their local definition of epilepsy, right? So they acknowledge that, which is particularly welcoming. However, let's go to the next slide. The problem was that the cultural competence framework was taught to clinicians as if it was a competence. So because there was no thorough understanding of what culture is, there was no... So, how do I explain this? So if I were to sit here and to tell you, to give you a list of, this is what Japanese women eat, this is what Japanese women believe, this is what the Chinese believe about this, this is what Lithuanians, I'm Lithuanian, this is what Lithuanians think of good diagnosis, or the fact that many people in rural India prefer injections over pills. So this is what cultural competence became, a list of cultural behaviors. These people do this, these people like this, these people blame this, illness like this. However, because culture is not a static but constantly evolving structure, because culture does not only refer to ethnic groups and their behavior related to illness, it led to this stereotyping of different ethnic groups and kind of negating that there are different groups within different cultures, that no ethnic group is actually homogeneous and coherent, and that there is no one line that would be true for the whole group. Mm-hmm. And the idea of competence is problematic because it assumes that if I give you a couple of lectures on the relationship between culture and health within that cultural competence framework, is that you can actually master the skill of understanding other people's cultural lives, which are so complex that cannot be given to anybody in a couple of lectures, right? So there are lots of problems with the cultural competence approach, even though it is still actually quite widely implemented in the United States. So is the Brazilian healthcare system very much influenced by American ideas of how to organize health?
Yes.
And what about the cultural competence framework?
Alguma posição? I think in Brazil I really would not say that we receive cultural frameworks for different ethnic groups that we have here. I think as in Brazil you have so many ethnic groups mixed together with a mixture of their cultural characteristics that are normal for you today. Because we have Japanese here for more than 100 years, and what they are doing for us is normal because they are integrated to the Brazilian culture. Similar what people from Northeast eat or what they think about or how they are, that is integrated to what we feel is Brazilian culture. I think in that way we are still a little bit limited because we don't have much influences of East Asian cultures here. We have not many Indian people here. We don't have many Muslim here. We don't have many Arabians here to have some contact. And we don't have, even for our native Indian people, we don't have any major sensibility of their cultural ideas. I don't think that we are prepared for some cultural frameworks. We just have ours, and that's okay. And everything you will think about differences, for you will be like, wow, I would not imagine that this would have any influence. Something like that.
Okay. So now the idea of, so why we moved on from the cultural competence framework is that even though I'm a cultural anthropologist, I cannot teach you about other people's culture. Not in a med school, not in a couple of lectures, or even in a couple of modules, right? It is a complex system of beliefs and meanings and metaphors that are impacting everybody's life. So if I ask you to tell me about Brazilian culture, I am sure that you wouldn't be able to tell me everything about it, that you all can agree, because it is actually a diverse mixture of experiences and ways of relating. I understand that this sounds a little bit vague, but it is such a complex system of meaning that I cannot teach you about it. And this is why with this lecture, I'm not trying to do cultural competences. I'm trying you to teach, to give you tools to think about what is culture, why does it impact health, but also about ways to engage with people from other cultures using this tool. And now we're changing the slides, of cultural humility. So this was the idea that was introduced as an alternative to cultural competence, because cultural competence assumed that you as a physician were in this hierarchical relationship to the patient. So you went to a couple of lectures or training courses, you learned ideas about what do Chinese people do or what do Japanese people do or think about illness. And you think that you are prepared to deal with patients. And I have just provided you why that kind of framework is problematic. Cultural humility, on the other hand, is this idea that you first of all acknowledge your own biases, your own cultural background, somebody who comes from a Brazilian culture, but also as somebody who's coming from biomedical culture. And that your ideas about illness and diagnosis and treatment are also culturally and socially constructed, right? However, yours are constructed within a medical background. And in order for you to relate to people from a different cultural background, you need to talk to them. You do not need a training course. You need to engage with them, to constantly show the willingness to ask them. So I specifically did not give you a list of questions, but cultural humility kind of training comes with these ideas that you cannot assume how much somebody's ethnicity or culture contributes to how is it relevant to a particular illness episode, but that the only way for you to find out is to actually ask them. So talking to people, because they know about their culture more than you or me will ever know. And so this is why it's called humility, because it's saying, so I acknowledge that I'm coming from a mixture of cultural backgrounds, but I will take that hat off and I will actually talk about my patient without making assumption that because they are Indian, they eat this food, therefore the prevalence of diabetes is higher, therefore they probably do this, therefore they probably do that, right? So instead of making all of these assumptions, you actually talk to the community. And the idea of cultural humility also acknowledges that culture is not the only factor that is contributing to an illness. That actually social class, income inequality, geographical area where you're living, gender, sexuality, all of these are intersecting in trying to contribute to somebody's illness experience and their interaction with a clinician in the healthcare system. Okay? So that kind of approach is much more patient-centered. It is all about equity. So destroying the power balance between the clinician and the patient, and is based on the engagement with the community. So through that person, and if you're practicing in a culturally diverse area, it's actually trying to. Let's change the slide. How much, Silke, how much time do I have?
About 20 minutes.
And would you like to spend some time with questions? Will you have questions, or can I talk for 20 minutes?
Do you have 15 minutes and we have 5 minutes questions?
Yeah, that's fine. So now the question to the audience will, do you already have questions that you would like to ask at the end or not?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. So now in order to prepare for this cultural humility idea, this is an extract from a lecture that I give to our first years when they just arrive at university, and what I'm giving them is a framework to see that what you're here to do, medicine, is actually a cultural system as well. Because we tend to think about people from other cultures as having some specific set of beliefs and behaviors and practices that are foreign to us, right? So if we practice the method of self-reflection and we look at our system within which you're now learning, and then later on we'll be practicing, that this medicine in itself is actually a cultural construct as well, and that it is a culture, that is a first step to practicing cultural humility. Let's change the slide. So think about, so if culture is more or less coherent and self-consistent set of values and behaviors, then think about medicine as something that comes with its own vocabulary. So if you're now suddenly wanting amongst each other to discuss, I don't know, the treatment and the diagnosis of fibroadenomas, yeah? So you will start in the language that I cannot understand. Yeah? If you're talking about cell cycle or the DNA and how the transmission and translation processes work, that is a language that I cannot understand. So you are already a group of people who have your own language, right? Do doctors in Brazil wear white coats?
Of course.
Oh, of course. So
We are identical to those you showed in the pictures.
Okay.
Always with the stethoscope wherever you go, in the supermarket, in the restaurant, mostly here in our city where medical students are so well seen. So you walk with your white coat wherever you go to, and with your stethoscope, right? Is it? It's changing a little bit, but it is classic.
So, before I move on, if you look at that photo that I put at the bottom of the slide, so this is a screenshot where I googled doctors UK or doctor. This is what comes up. What can you notice in that selection of 10 images?
Beside white coat and stethoscope?
Anything else?
Anything else? What else? Sympathetic old man? Very trustable? All smiling because they're always happy?
Anything else?
Posture.
Almost the same posture, yes?
What else? They're all white?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes, of course.
And 8 out of 10? And 8 out of 10 are male?
Yes. That's what I said. Always just very confident old men.
Yes. So,
And they are all older. They are not very young. Most of them are.
so in the UK is a highly multicultural society. This is absolutely no way a representation of what a doctor looks like. So even the public's idea, and for me, if I Google a doctor, for me that is a representation of what the society holds to be the meaning of a doctor. So this is how the society imagines the doctor looks like. In the UK, that's absolutely not true, but it is gendered, it is white, and wears a white coat. Did you know that doctors in the United Kingdom do not wear white coats?
I discovered it recently when we wanted to sell the white coats to the winter school students.
Yeah. So no doctor in the United
I had no use for it.
So
Yes.
no doctor in the United Kingdom wears a white coat. It is, I think, by stopping using the white coats, they reduced hospital infection rates very, very, very significantly.
Exactly.
However, the way doctors are portrayed in the films in the UK, on the internet, everywhere's with a white coat, because a white coat is a symbol for sterility and science and cleanliness, but it is not in any form or shape a part of what being a doctor or practicing medicine like. However, it's part of the wide imagination. But why I'm telling you all of this? Because there are symbols and rituals that you may, just like our students do, getting into the med school. So many of our students get stethoscopes as a gift from their parents, and they're engraved with their names. And it's a symbol that they get. It is not a necessity. So what I'm trying to say that there are various aspects to the subject that you're studying now that are cultural, because they have nothing to do with the practicality of science, because it carries these symbols of meaning and status and authority that are all cultural artifacts rather than natural parts of science. Let's change the slides. So the idea is that in an increasingly diverse world, we have various medical systems that are operating in every single society. We call that medical pluralism. So the idea is that if we take the word medicine to refer to all forms of healing that are prevalent all across the world, people have been healing themselves for thousands of years before the invention of X-rays and antibiotics, right? So if we refer to healing as medicine, then medicine is ubiquitous. And this is why in my slides you have noticed, when I refer to the medical schools that I work in, that you're in, I don't refer to that as medicine. I refer to it as biomedicine. Why do I do that? Because the idea of ethnomedicine. So the idea is that every society has its own medical system. So in so Chinese medicine in China, Ayurveda in India, Unani in India, and so on. All of these medical systems are as institutionalized as biomedicine. They also have training schools. They have their own ideas of illness causation and treatment. So Tibetan medicine, for instance, is very prevalent in certain parts of India. And there, a Tibetan healer will take your pulse from both of your wrists, and they're able to identify 14, 15 different qualities of your blood pulse. Things that our doctors don't look for, but they're able to. So their forms of diagnosis are very different from biomedicine. However, these are medical systems that people are using all across the world, right? So the idea is that people from different societies are living in medically pluralistic healing systems, and people are choosing which system to go to, right? So biomedicine is very much prevalent in India as much as Ayurveda and Unani and Tibetan medicine and so on. But what I'm trying to get at, that every healing system is very much closely related to the society and culture within which it is a part of. So Tibetan medicine is very much related to Buddhist ideas about the body and the relation between the body and enlightenment, for instance. In the same way, the biomedicine that you are studying and that I am part of teaching is also a cultural system that is very much related to the ideas that were born in the 17th century Europe, mainly by René Descartes. And I have it on the next couple of slides with a photo. So the idea, philosophical idea of the mind-body dualism was actually introduced by René Descartes. And many of the assumptions of modern medicine, or what I call biomedicine, are very much grounded in this philosophical assertion by Descartes, saying that the mind and the body are actually very separate substances. So so you can be fooled by your senses, what you see, what you smell, what you touch, but your rational mind is something that will not disappoint you. So you always have to rely on your mind rather than on the body. And he came up with this distinction in the 17th century, and this was the time when dissection started taking place, because up until then in Europe, all across Europe, the idea of the indivisible, the fact that the mind and the body and the soul are exactly that there is a unity between the two, and that in order for you to go to heaven, so imagine 17th century Europe being highly Christian society, you're not cut into bodies, because then the body is not whole, the body will not go to heaven. So up until then, until Descartes came and wrote his philosophical treatise, there were no dissections. So there was no... So the beginning of anatomy starts with him actually saying, well, the body and the mind are separate. Soul is nothing to be talked about, because rationally, we know that there is no God. Therefore, there is no heaven. Therefore, we can cut into bodies and discover what's inside in order to progress science. So
and
the whole...
And he was burned for this?
Was he burned?
I don't know.
Because he marks the Enlightenment period. So we're moving away from the Middle Ages. So I don't really know actually how he was punished for. But if we trace, so basically what I'm trying to say is that we quite often try to imagine science or medicine as this abstract ahistorical process, that there is this reality out there and you are trying to learn it in a direct way, and you either succeed or fail it, right? So what I'm trying to show you now is that there are historical roots to this whole science and the idea of what are the assumptions that we're making about our patients and the assumptions on which the whole science and the whole biomedicine is based, that these roots are cultural in nature. So that the profession that you are practicing is also a culture. It is not an ahistorical phenomena that is abstract in nature. Science, cultural roots. The scientific practices that happen in the lab, the clinical practices that happen in the hospital, they are all cultural. Many of them are cultural practices. They are not necessitated by the requirement of science. Many of these things are actually done because they are necessitated by the cultural convention. So if we move on now, and this is the very last bit that I want to do, so there is a movement in the United States trying to move away from cultural competence to cultural humility. And this is what we try to do. In order for you to practice cultural humility, you need a moment of self-reflection. To self-reflect on the profession and the cultural roots of that, plus the self-reflection on what is it, are you part of Brazilian culture? What does it mean to be part of that culture? And so on. But that is the work that you will have to do. But alongside the cultural humility idea, there is an idea of structural competence. And it is the idea that there are certain structural factors that bind together. So keep in mind that this idea comes from the United States, okay? So they're trying to say that cultural differences are not the only differences that make impact on health care and symptoms and treatment options. They're saying that if we look at the intersection of race, class, and symptoms, we can actually see quite a lot of structural factors coming into play. They're saying culture is one thing, but we need to constantly look into the socioeconomic position. We need to look at the racialized position within the society, and that patients' articulation of symptoms will be very strongly dependent on the conditions of society and the way they are, and the way the society is organized. So if society is suffering from, if there are lots of instances of institutionalized racism, if there are instances of institutionalized or any other form of homophobia, if the society is very much ethnocentric, so these are the conditions through which all of these different axes of difference articulate clinical symptoms. So the structural competency does two things. They say that symptoms, again, from what I started from the beginning, are not a direct articulation of a feeling within one's body, but that symptoms themselves are somehow structurally determined. So imagine if you have somebody coming with a back pain. Yeah? And this is one of the examples that is given through this approach. And as a clinician who is not trained in cultural or structural competence, you send them to a physiotherapist, give them painkillers, just treat the backache, right? So somebody who is trained in an ability to see how different structures articulate in people's lives, and by structures I mean both culture, but also institutional regulations, policies, migratory trajectories, and so on, right? So if you are trained in that, you will be able to ask questions that will, at the end of the day, will tell you that this person who is complaining of the backache is Mexican migrant, a migrant from Mexico who works 12 hours a day on a farm, bent down, picking strawberries. Yeah? So now your problem is not the backache. Yeah? Now your problem is an actual workload that is harmful to his body. So even if you give him painkillers, that will relieve him for 2 hours. But if he persists working in these conditions, he will persist with a chronic back pain that will only get worse, and you will keep the same patient and the ibuprofen will not work. So your ability to identify that this person is articulating the back pain, that my back pain is from sitting at the laptop all day, right? Somebody else's back pain is from working 12 hours on a strawberry farm, plus somebody else's back pain is something very, very different. So if you're able to identify how social structures are harming one person, whereas not harming others, you are able to address them much more efficiently. This is what structural competence is trying to do. They're saying that various economic, political, social, and cultural structures are affecting clinical interaction both on our side as a patient and your side as a doctor. So for instance, in the UK, one of the structure that is very much impacting on the doctor side is a regulation that we have. So our consultation with a GP lasts 10 minutes. That is a regulation. And we are only allowed to present one complaint in a 10-minute consultation. There are signs in every single clinic that if you have 2 complaints, you have to get 2 slots. So then for 20 minutes. So everything is very much regulated like that. So the doctor cannot possibly spend 15 minutes with you. So that is a structure that is reducing, that is impacting on you as a clinician. There are various other structures that are impacting on me as a patient. So your ability to recognize those structures, whether they are related to class, race, gender, or culture, is what structural competence is about. And if we have a little bit of time, I would like you to read 2 scenarios, if we have time.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we go to the next slide, can I ask the girl on the end in blue and glasses to start reading 1 sentence at a time and to go around?
Read.
Let's read the first scenario, 1 sentence at a time. Is that okay?
Ok. Tá. Você tá com a aula no negócio ou não?
Tô procurando aqui.
A gente tá no slide. Yes. A 10-year-old Chinese girl.
Alguém que tá com ele aberto pode ler?
É. Vamos lá, começando aí. Quem que tá aberto?
Eu aqui.
Tá.
Can I start?
Yes, please.
A 10-year-old Sudanese girl lived for 3 years as the last cared for child with an aunt who had 4 other children. Her mother, a Sudanese journalist, was persecuted and jailed after having written politically sensitive articles in a national newspaper. One night, her mother suddenly arrived to take the child away under cover of darkness. They walked all night and slept across the border. Once across, they lived in a refugee camp for 2 years, facing various difficulties because they had no male family member to protect them. Eventually, with assistance from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and the Canadian government, they made their way to Canada as government-assisted refugees.
Next.
The mother has since been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and although she is being treated, she has difficulty functioning in the day-to-day and adapting to life. The daughter quickly became her mother's interpreter and caregiver. She appeared well adapted, did well in school, was motivated to help her mother, smiled and spoke easily, and was very intent on learning English. One thought was called with her own.
Okay, so we have one trajectory of migration. And if we go to the next slide, we have another story.
No. No.
Why are we not reading?
Me? No, I'm just jumping across. She just jumped across too.
10-year-old daughter, nice school teacher in a rural area of Catherine left the country with her mother under the protection of a maid during the war period.
These diplomats had arranged visas to Germany and provided a car with diplomatic license plates and a skillful driver who drove them to the safest airport. There, they boarded a small plane that connected to a pre-arranged flight to Frankfurt, Germany.
Mother and daughter lived for 2 years in Frankfurt. The child attended school while her mother worked as a teacher. They rented a room from a friend. Ultimately, they decided to migrate to Canada to join extended family in Toronto, who sponsored them. The mother remarried after arriving in Canada.
So now the idea is that if you are a clinician who sees a 10-year-old Sudanese girl, if you were trained within the cultural competence framework, you might be leaning towards this whole understanding, oh, the Sudanese women do that, all this, right? The structural competency framework is something that allows you to look into the journey. How do you feel these two journeys are they similar? These two, they're both 10-year-old, they're both Sudanese migrants in Canada. Do you think they would be experiencing the world differently?
O que vocês acham? As duas são meninas de 10 anos, né? Tá. Só que o histórico das duas é diferente. Vocês acham que a vida para as duas no Canadá a partir de agora é igual? No. So they would experience different, they have different experience and they will interpret their lives differently. For sure. Right?
Their migratory experiences themselves. So it's not the cultural background, it's the background of migration. That the first girl has to be smuggled through the border, and the second one has a car waiting for them to take them somewhere, a daughter of a diplomat and so on. So these two journeys themselves might actually have more impact on their health than their cultural background. But you can only find that out if you speak to me.
Yes, if you ask them.
Yes.
If you don't ask. Yes.
And yes. So the main message of this whole talk today is that, first of all, I would like you to encourage you to, that's how I talk to my students. I say, I need you to be able to do this. With you, I can't say that. Sorry, this is why I corrected myself. I would like you to be able to think of the system that you are becoming a part of as a cultural system. Because if you see it as a cultural system, then it is easier for you to move away from it and to understand others. Because if you acknowledge that you are coming from a cultural position, then it's easier for you to understand others in order to demonstrate that humility. Where you, like, yes, my way of conceptualizing epilepsy is only one way of doing that. I would like to know how you do it, in order for me to understand whether you will be adhering to it or not, whether you will be returning for it. But second is to say that structures constrain people's lives in very significant ways. You as clinicians can make a difference by actually tackling not the symptom, but the cause. So if you get to know that the cause of my pain, for which I keep to say, is actually an exploitation that is done on me by the plantation holder, then there are things that you, even as a clinician, can do to target that inequality. And it's only with the structural intervention that we can actually reduce the health inequalities that exist in society between the dominant, whether it's cultural group or economic group, and those who are subordinated. This is all I wanted to say. And we are just creating a better world.
This is perfect. And I think this is what we need to create a better world with much more tolerance between all our differences. Very
Do you
nice.
guys have questions?
Somebody wants to comment something, to say something about. Would think that you will feel situations like these. You will feel situations like these. And I think, thank you very much, Eva, for this explanation. I think you brought a lot of aspects that are very, very important for them. Not only what you are the definitions of frameworks, of cultural frameworks, of differences, races, gender, ethnicities, but what subjective interpretations will have an impact on what you will feel as disease, that would be your illness. So pain, I think, fatigue is an example that is fantastic, because pain can be, or pain is enabling. And if you say you feel pain and I feel pain, we don't necessarily feel the same pain. And to understand this, you see how limited we are in our world.
Can I give can I comment on that? I'm so sorry that I'm interrupting you, but can I tell you this? So something that actually brings what you said and what I said into perspective. The point is that there is research out there based in the United States that is showing that clinicians tend to give more painkillers to white folk than to African Americans, right? So lots of pain that is experienced by African Americans remains untreated. Now, why is that? That is because cultural ideas about race and perception of pain in the US have also been researched, show that there are such discriminatory ideas of African Americans' perseverance of pain that are even articulating in children. So there was a study done a couple of years ago. They found random people on the street and they showed two, I think they were like 5 or 6 year old girls, and said, who is in more pain? And the study showed that the public in the US think that even a 5-year-old African American girl is experiencing less pain than the white girl. And that is articulating to the way clinicians actually think pain, because pain cannot be measured, there is no test to show whose pain is bigger, who's not. The cultural ideas that clinicians themselves have about how pain and race are related and who is experiencing more pain, that these judgments are also an articulation not of cultural difference, but of structural inequalities. And the racist ideas that pain is somehow related to the race and that some people can persevere more pain than others. Oh my God, sorry, I can't go on about this.
No, but that's exactly. I think we have it here with Japanese. Japanese support more pain, okay? So if they came with a complaint with pain, I just will, or differently, I will be more aware when a Japanese woman comes and says, and complains of pain. Because traditionally, she would not complain of pain. So if she complains, it must be worse than the Brazilian woman who always complains and does not have anything. So we have these problems also, and these stigmas. What I wanted to tell you is that we are so unable to make these associations or this interpretations of what pain may feel to one or to the other, that we are creating scales, visual scales for pain as a possible objective marker. How much pain do you feel it? So you have a scale, 0 to 10. 0 is no repercussion. 10 is absolutely incapacitating repercussion. And tell me, where in between is your pain today? 5, 6, 7, 9, 2. We need, in our education, we are so stuck to objective parameters to describe illness that we are unable to interpret repercussions of something that is not linked to an objective data. And this is bad, and we have to change it. One point is just looking at the patient as being a human being that you have to ask some things about. A very good start. And knowing that you are equal and histories are different where you come from, and that necessarily the back pain is not the major reason why you are there. But the problem is another one, and we have this a lot of times in our patients. And this awareness, I think these examples were fantastic. They're very, very good. And I hope that you, of course, in one lecture you will not learn, you will not be able to do everything, but I think you showed these aspects and you brought us the importance of it. And I think that has to be trained, that has to be shown. Nobody shows it, points this. I will not reflect about. And you will have to reflect about. Because you will have very bad examples on your daily life in future, but you will have some good examples. But you have to understand what is bad and good and what you could improve. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Everyone's good?
So, thanks a lot. We will go for lunch because we will have lectures right after.
Okay.
I think everybody is almost passing away.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for listening.
Yes.
You have a good day. If you have any questions, you can always email me. There's my email address at the end of the presentation. Okay?
Eva, thank you very much. This was very, very nice. And I hope we will do much more courses like this. We have them for more 5 years, so we can do a lot of things.
Oh my God, you'll see a lot of me guys.